She walked slowly down the long corridor, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. The walls were lined with photographs of famous musicians, each one smiling confidently as if they had never known fear or doubt. She felt out of place among these symbols of perfection. Her clothes were plain, a soft gray dress that fell to her knees, shoes that had seen better days, and her hair tied back in a simple braid. She noticed some people glancing at her with curiosity, some with barely concealed smiles, and others with open disbelief. Some whispered to each other, their words just faint enough that she caught bits and pieces. "Who let her in?" one whispered. "She looks so ordinary," said another. She took a deep breath, trying to push the thoughts aside. She had come here to play, to let her music speak for her. That was all that mattered. The audition hall was buzzing with energy, a mix of nervous excitement and competitive tension. She could see the other contestants chatting confidently, their heads held high, dresses and suits perfectly chosen to impress. They laughed easily, exchanged practiced greetings, and carried themselves as if they belonged on the stage and nowhere else. She wondered if she could ever feel that kind of confidence. For a moment, she questioned herself, wondering if she had made a mistake in coming here. But then she remembered the countless hours she had spent at the piano, the nights she had poured her heart into practice, and the quiet moments when music had been her only companion. She straightened her back and reminded herself that she had a gift, and that gift was what mattered now. Sitting in the waiting area, she watched others play before her. Some performances were technically flawless, but lacked emotion. Others had flair and style but faltered in the details. She noticed the judges jotting down notes, nodding politely, and occasionally raising their eyebrows in appreciation or slight disappointment. Each performance seemed to tell a story, and she felt herself imagining the lives of the performers behind each note. When her turn drew closer, her stomach tightened, and a wave of fear swept over her. She pressed her palms together, willing herself to stay calm. She told herself that the world outside didn't matter here, that it was only her and the piano, and that if she let herself feel the music, it would guide her. The hall itself was grand, with high ceilings that echoed even the smallest sound. Light filtered in through tall windows, casting patterns on the polished wooden floor. The piano sat at the center of the stage, black and shiny, waiting for someone to unlock its voice. She imagined herself seated there, fingers poised over the keys, and tried to picture the music flowing from her hands. In her mind, it sounded perfect, the notes blending seamlessly, carrying emotion and beauty into the air. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the memory of late nights practicing alone flood her mind. She could almost hear the applause of no one but herself, but it felt enough. When her name was called, she stood slowly, feeling the eyes of the room shift toward her. Some faces bore surprise, others amusement, and a few looked at her with thinly veiled disdain. She walked toward the piano with careful steps, trying not to let their reactions shake her. Each step felt heavy, as though she was carrying not only her own nerves but the judgment of everyone around her. Sitting on the bench, she adjusted her position and let her hands rest lightly on the keys. She could feel the cool wood beneath her fingers, the smooth surface promising sound, the potential for expression, the chance to show what she could do. The whispers grew faint, replaced by the hum of expectation. She could hear the judges shifting in their seats, pens poised over paper, faces unreadable. The other contestants watched, some with barely disguised smirks, others with expressions of polite interest. She could feel their thoughts, the assumptions they made about her because of the way she looked. She knew they expected mediocrity. They expected a plain performance from a plain woman. For a moment, doubt crept in, threatening to make her hands shake, but she pushed it away. Music had always been her refuge, and she decided it would be her shield now. As she prepared to play, she took a slow, steadying breath. The world narrowed to the piano and the music that lived within her. She imagined the melody she would play, each note carefully chosen, each pause meaningful. She imagined the rise and fall of the music, the gentle whispers, the strong declarations, the tender moments that would speak from her soul to anyone who would listen. She could feel the rhythm inside her chest, the pulse that had carried her through so many hours of practice, and she let it guide her hands. She pressed the first key softly, almost hesitantly. The sound filled the room, delicate and clear. A hush fell over the audience, and even some of the judges leaned slightly forward, intrigued. She continued, each note growing bolder, more confident. The music began to take shape, carrying emotion and depth that no one had expected. She felt herself melting into the performance, her fears and insecurities fading, replaced by the pure joy of creation. Each chord resonated with her own experiences, her own struggles, and her own triumphs. It was as though every moment of her life had led to this instant, and she poured herself completely into the sound. The room seemed to hold its breath, captivated by the unexpected beauty of her music. She noticed eyes widening, mouths opening slightly, and pens pausing mid-note. The whispers and laughter had disappeared, replaced by silent awe. She had imagined this moment many times, but the reality was even more powerful than she had dreamed. She could feel the energy of the room shifting, the air thick with emotion, and she let herself float on the music. She played not for recognition, not for applause, but for the music itself, letting it express everything she could not put into words. Time seemed to blur as she continued, the notes flowing effortlessly from her fingers. She was no longer the plain woman who had walked nervously into the hall. She was the music itself, a voice that transcended appearance and expectation. The walls, the judges, the audience, all faded into the background. There was only her and the piano, the melody weaving through the air, telling a story of resilience, hope, and beauty. Each chord seemed to reach into the hearts of those listening, touching something deep and unspoken. As she finished the piece, there was a moment of absolute silence. The echo of the last note lingered in the hall, a fragile, perfect ending. She opened her eyes slowly, meeting the gaze of the judges and the audience. The shock on their faces was unmistakable. No one had expected this. The plain woman they had dismissed had just created something extraordinary. The fear and doubt that had plagued her earlier seemed like a distant memory. She sat quietly, letting the moment settle, feeling a quiet satisfaction deep within her. Finally, the first hand clapped, breaking the silence. Then another, and another, until the room was filled with applause. Some faces held tears, others wide-eyed astonishment, and a few showed embarrassed recognition of their earlier judgment. She smiled softly, not with pride, but with the peaceful knowledge that she had shared her gift and let it shine. The plain woman, once ridiculed, had let her music speak louder than any word or glance ever could. As she settled onto the piano bench, a ripple of whispers spread across the room. Some of the other contestants exchanged sly smiles, while a few outright laughed. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, their judgment pressing down as if her appearance alone could decide her worth. Her hands hovered over the keys, her fingers tingling with nervous energy. She noticed a young man in a sharp suit smirking at her, leaning toward his friend to whisper something. She didn't hear the words clearly, but she knew what they meant. He didn't think she belonged here. The ridicule in the room was palpable, and it made her stomach twist with a mixture of anxiety and determination. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to ignore the laughter and the whispers. This was her moment, and nothing outside the music could matter. She remembered the long nights she had spent practicing alone, the hours of repetition and focus, the way music had become her escape, her companion, her voice when words failed. All of that had led her here, to this moment, and she refused to let the opinions of strangers define her. She shifted slightly on the bench, adjusting her posture, letting her shoulders relax, and let her fingers lightly touch the keys. The cool surface beneath them grounded her. She reminded herself that the piano didn't judge her. It didn't care about appearances. It only responded to touch, to intention, to heart. The first few seconds felt like an eternity. She could hear the faint chuckles from the back of the hall and the soft sighs of impatience from some of the judges. She closed her eyes for a brief instant, blocking out everything but the sound she could create. The whispers continued, a low hum at the edge of her awareness, but she focused on her breathing, on the memory of music flowing from her soul. When she pressed the first key, the sound was soft, almost hesitant, but clear and pure. It broke through the tension in the room, drawing eyes from the smirking faces to the piano itself. At first, the other contestants seemed confused. They had expected a dull, unremarkable performance. Some shook their heads slightly, others exchanged incredulous looks. One of the judges raised an eyebrow. Pen paused mid-note, clearly surprised. Her confidence grew with each passing moment. The first notes were only a prelude, a gentle invitation into the world she was about to create. She allowed herself to feel the music, to let it guide her hands, to let it tell the story that words never could. She could feel the rhythm of her heartbeat aligning with the rhythm of the piece, the pulse of her life flowing through each key. The smirks and laughter began to fade as the music grew richer and more expressive. The notes told a story of quiet strength, of perseverance, of a heart that had known struggle but refused to break. She could feel the room leaning in, the energy shifting. Even the harshest faces softened as they listened, captivated by the emotion in each chord, by the depth she poured into every movement. The audience, once ready to mock her, became silent, each person holding their breath, waiting to see where this performance would go. The young man in the suit looked slightly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, unable to disguise his surprise at the beauty unfolding before him. She let the music build slowly, the melody rising and falling like the tide. She felt the story of her life in each note, the moments of self-doubt, the hours spent alone at the piano, the quiet victories no one else had seen. She let all of that pour into the performance, letting the music speak the words she had never been able to say. The judges, who had been skeptical just moments ago, were now fully attentive, leaning forward, their pens forgotten as they absorbed every nuance. The whispers that had filled the room were replaced by a heavy, expectant silence, a collective realization that this was not what anyone had expected. Her hands moved with grace and precision, the music flowing effortlessly, yet carrying an intensity that made it impossible to ignore. Each note seemed to reach into the hearts of those listening, touching something deep and universal. She could see subtle changes in the audience, the softening of shoulders, the widening of eyes, the gentle nods of acknowledgement. The ridicule that had greeted her arrival was now nowhere to be found. She felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of justice in the way her music had spoken louder than any mocking word or glance. The young man in the suit, who had been one of the loudest in his laughter, now sat still, his eyes fixed on her hands, unable to tear his gaze away. He leaned forward slightly, as if trying to understand how someone who looked so ordinary could create something so extraordinary. Around him, others who had mocked her whispered apologies to themselves, recognizing the unfairness of their assumptions. The judges scribbled furiously, clearly impressed, yet trying to maintain an air of professional composure. She didn't care about their notes, their assessments, their recognition. She only cared about the connection she felt with the music and, unexpectedly, with everyone in the room. She continued, each measure unfolding naturally, effortlessly, as though the piano and her soul had become one. She allowed herself to fully experience the music, letting the emotion flow freely. There was a moment when the melody dipped into a softer, more vulnerable passage, and she could see a tear glistening in the eye of one of the judges. A woman in the back of the room, who had been barely paying attention, now held her breath, captivated by the power and sincerity in each note. The whispers of ridicule were completely gone, replaced by an awe that filled every corner of the hall. As the piece moved toward its climax, the intensity of her playing increased, yet it remained controlled and deliberate. She felt the energy of the room supporting her, not in mockery, but in silent respect. Every finger movement, every gentle press of a key, carried meaning, told a story, and shared a piece of her heart. She imagined the people in the room understanding her journey without needing words. The young man in the suit looked humbled, his earlier arrogance replaced by admiration. Other contestants stared in disbelief, some shaking their heads as if to say, "I can't believe this is happening." Her music had transformed their expectations, their doubts, and their ridicule into a shared experience of wonder and respect. Finally, she reached the last note, a soft, lingering sound that seemed to hang in the air like a delicate breath. She let it fade naturally, her hands resting lightly on the keys. For a moment, there was complete silence. The audience, the judges, the other contestants, all seemed frozen, absorbing the impact of what they had just witnessed. She opened her eyes, meeting their gazes, and for the first time, she felt a sense of equality with everyone in the room. She had been underestimated, mocked, dismissed, but her music had leveled the playing field in a way that nothing else could. Then, slowly, the room erupted. Applause filled the space, some of it hesitant at first, then growing louder and more enthusiastic. The young man in the suit clapped, a look of genuine respect on his face. The other contestants joined in, some with awe, others with embarrassment for having doubted her. The judges, once skeptical, now looked at her with admiration, clearly impressed by her skill, her emotion, and her poise. She remained seated, smiling softly, feeling the warmth of the acknowledgement but not needing it. The music had done its work, and she had done hers. She had shown that true talent could not be judged by appearances, and that the heart and soul behind a performance mattered far more than any outward impression. As she rose from the bench and walked away, she noticed the whispers had changed. They were no longer mocking, but filled with wonder, curiosity, and respect. Some of the contestants offered quiet nods or small smiles of acknowledgement. The judges gave her subtle, approving gestures. She walked with a quiet pride, knowing that she had faced ridicule, faced doubt, and had emerged not only unscathed but stronger. The experience had reminded her that music was her voice, her shield, and her power. The plain woman who had been ridiculed at the audition had made everyone in the room pause, reflect, and recognize the extraordinary within the ordinary. As the first notes left her fingers, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The soft, clear melody hung in the air, catching everyone off guard. The smirks and laughter that had been so prominent just moments ago vanished, replaced by a sudden, almost tangible silence. The audience froze, unsure of how to react. The judges leaned forward, their pens suspended over the paper as they listened intently. The music was delicate yet powerful, carrying emotion that seemed far beyond the ordinary. She could feel the depth of every note, the way it resonated not only within her but across the entire hall. Each sound seemed to tell a story of someone who had faced doubt, ridicule, and invisibility, yet had nurtured a talent so profound it could not be ignored. The plain woman sat with a calm posture, her eyes briefly closed as she let herself merge with the music. Her fingers moved gracefully across the keys, creating a symphony of feelings that captivated everyone present. She was no longer conscious of the audience's gaze or the judgments that had weighed on her. She was completely absorbed in her performance. The notes were her voice, speaking of her patience, her long hours of practice, and the silent determination that had carried her through countless struggles. Each chord seemed to reach deep into the hearts of the listeners, awakening emotions they hadn't realized were waiting to be stirred. A faint whisper of awe rippled through the audience. Some people glanced at one another, their expressions a mixture of shock and admiration. The judges, often hard to impress and cautious in their praise, sat motionless, eyes fixed on the pianist, absorbing every nuanced detail. The piece swelled with rising emotion, each passage more intricate and moving than the last. Her hands glided over the keys with precision and fluidity, producing sounds that were both technically perfect and deeply heartfelt. The contrast between her plain appearance and the grandeur of her music was striking, a lesson in the deceptive nature of outward appearances. The young man who had been so confident earlier now sat rigid in his chair, his smirk replaced by a mixture of surprise and respect. He glanced around at his peers, noticing that they too were captivated, silent, and drawn in by the unexpected depth of her talent. For the first time, he seemed to understand that she was far more than she appeared, that her music carried power and emotion that could move even the most skeptical listener. The other contestants, many of whom had been brimming with self-assurance, were now humbled, their earlier judgment dissolving under the weight of her performance. The hall was no longer a place for rivalry. It had become a vessel for the beauty she poured into it. Her music shifted in tone, moving from gentle, introspective passages to more dramatic, powerful sections. The dynamics were intense, yet balanced, showing a mastery that could only come from years of dedication and experience. She played with an understanding of rhythm and phrasing that made the melody seem alive, almost breathing. The audience leaned in instinctively, each person caught up in the story unfolding through the notes. There was an unspoken recognition that what they were hearing was extraordinary. Every key she pressed seemed to carry the weight of her journey, a journey that had been invisible to the outside world until this moment. As the music continued, small reactions began to emerge. A judge shifted slightly, eyes widening in astonishment. Another took a small, almost imperceptible breath, a signal that they were profoundly moved. A few members of the audience had tears in their eyes, silently acknowledging the emotional power she wielded through her performance. Her focus never wavered. She was entirely in the present, feeling each note and letting it guide her expression. She had become both the storyteller and the story itself, allowing her music to communicate in a way that words never could. The crescendo approached, a moment of tension and release that demanded both technical skill and emotional presence. She guided the melody carefully, letting it rise naturally without forcing it, each chord ringing with clarity and intent. The energy in the room shifted again, not from anticipation of judgment, but from the awe of witnessing something truly remarkable. The laughter and ridicule that had greeted her arrival were completely erased, replaced by an almost reverent silence. People held their breath, caught between disbelief and admiration, fully aware that they were witnessing a rare and powerful moment. Her hands moved with an elegance that seemed effortless, each motion intentional, each note imbued with meaning. The music reached its peak, a powerful expression of hope, struggle, and triumph, and she felt a surge of energy from within. The connection between her and the piano was total. It was as if the instrument itself understood every nuance she intended to convey. The melody carried an unspoken message to everyone in the room, that talent, passion, and perseverance were far more important than appearances, and that those who underestimated her had been utterly mistaken. The plain woman allowed the final notes to linger, soft and resonant, fading slowly into the air. The hall remained silent for a heartbeat longer than expected, the weight of her performance settling over every listener. Even the most skeptical faces could not deny the brilliance they had just experienced. The judges, who had been reserved and measured, exchanged subtle glances, acknowledging the mastery before them. The audience, once filled with mockery and doubt, now sat transfixed, hearts and minds engaged fully in the aftermath of her music. She opened her eyes slowly, feeling the intensity of the room's attention. Her expression was calm, almost serene, as if she had not just performed for others but for herself, for the music itself. The applause began tentatively at first, a single hand clapping, then another, until it grew into a steady, overwhelming acknowledgement of her talent. Faces that had mocked her now showed admiration and respect. The young man in the suit clapped fervently, his earlier arrogance replaced with genuine recognition. The other contestants joined in, some hesitant, some with awe, but all acknowledging the unexpected brilliance they had witnessed. The plain woman stood, a small, quiet smile on her lips. She had faced ridicule, doubt, and judgment, yet she had transformed it all into something powerful and moving. Her music had spoken for her, communicating her heart and soul in ways that no words could capture. The audience, once ready to dismiss her, now felt a mixture of humility and awe. The judges, too, were visibly impressed, their notes momentarily forgotten as they absorbed the magnitude of what had just been shared. As she walked away from the piano, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. The ridicule that had awaited her at the door was gone, replaced by acknowledgement and respect. She had proven, not to them but to herself, that her dedication and passion could overcome any prejudice. The plain woman had become extraordinary in the eyes of all who had witnessed her, not because of appearance or charm, but because of the pure, undeniable power of her talent. It was a moment that would linger in the memories of everyone present, a reminder that true ability and artistry could never be underestimated. The music continued to flow from her fingers, more powerful and expressive with each passing moment. She felt herself becoming one with the piano, her emotions channeling through every note. The audience, once skeptical and ready to judge, was now completely absorbed, unable to look away. Every chord, every melody carried layers of feeling, a reflection of years of practice, determination, and quiet resilience. The plain woman's presence on the stage had transformed. She was no longer just an ordinary figure in a gray dress. She had become a storyteller, a creator, a force that demanded attention without a word. Her hands moved effortlessly over the keys, each motion deliberate and graceful. The music swelled, filling the hall with energy and emotion. Judges leaned forward, captivated by the depth and sophistication of her playing. Some of the audience members felt a lump in their throats as tears welled up in their eyes. They had underestimated her because of her simple appearance, but now they realized that she was extraordinary. The melody was rich and complex, revealing nuances of pain, hope, struggle, and triumph. It seemed to speak to each person in a unique way, reaching deep into their hearts and stirring emotions they hadn't anticipated. The other contestants, who had been poised and confident at the start, now sat in stunned silence. Their earlier whispers and snickers were replaced with awe and admiration. One young woman, who had previously exchanged mocking glances with a friend, now held her hands together, eyes wide, clearly moved by the performance. The young man who had sneered at her before seemed humbled, almost ashamed of his earlier judgment. He leaned slightly forward, as if trying to understand how someone who had appeared so ordinary could possess such extraordinary talent. She did not rush through the piece. Each moment was savored, each note allowed to breathe. She felt the music tell its story naturally, growing in strength and intensity, then softening to gentle whispers that touched the soul. The room was alive with the vibrations of her music, and every listener could feel the dedication and passion behind it. Her performance was no longer just about proving herself. It had become a shared experience, a connection between the pianist and everyone in the room. The judges, known for their composure and critical eyes, were visibly moved. They exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing something rare. Notes were being written down, but the pens occasionally paused as they listened, unable to keep up with the emotional weight of the performance. They had heard many talented musicians, but few had conveyed such raw emotion and technical mastery simultaneously. Every passage revealed not only her skill but her deep understanding of music as a language of the heart. The crescendo approached, a moment of tension and release that required both precision and soul. She guided the melody with confidence, letting it rise naturally, the power of her hands matched by the emotion she felt. The audience leaned in, some on the edge of their seats, drawn into the world she was creating. The music was no longer just notes on a page. It was a living, breathing story, unfolding in real time. Every chord told of perseverance, every pause spoke of reflection, and every flourish expressed joy, pain, and triumph. The plain woman had taken them on a journey, one they would remember long after the last note faded. As the climax of the piece neared, the hall seemed to hold its breath. The plain woman's playing had become a testament to her resilience and artistry. She felt her own emotions swell as she moved through the final passages, letting the music carry her completely. The audience responded in kind, absorbed in the sound, feeling each emotion she poured into it. Even the most skeptical faces were transformed, their disbelief replaced with wonder. The judges' expressions softened, acknowledging the power and brilliance of what they were witnessing. This was no ordinary performance. It was a revelation. She allowed the final notes to linger, soft and deliberate, letting them echo through the hall. The silence that followed was heavy, as if the room itself needed to process the impact of her music. No one spoke immediately. The air was thick with emotion. Then, slowly, the first hand clapped, breaking the stillness. Another joined, and soon the applause grew, filling the space with sound and appreciation. The audience rose to their feet, some wiping tears from their eyes, others simply staring in awe. The plain woman, who had been underestimated, had left them completely captivated. Her music had spoken for her, and everyone in the room recognized the truth of her extraordinary talent. She rose from the piano bench, her expression calm and serene, almost as if nothing had happened beyond the music itself. Yet inside, she felt a quiet triumph. The ridicule, the whispers, the judgments, they were all gone, replaced by respect and admiration. She had shown that talent and passion were not determined by appearances, and that those who had doubted her had been completely mistaken. Every listener felt the depth of her performance, the honesty and beauty of her expression, and the power of someone who had refused to let the world's expectations define her. The judges gave her subtle gestures of approval, nodding and exchanging glances that acknowledged the rare excellence they had just experienced. The audience continued to applaud, many still standing, moved by the emotional journey she had taken them on. The other contestants approached her cautiously, their expressions a mixture of humility and awe. Some offered quiet words of admiration, acknowledging the skill and emotion that had made her performance unforgettable. She listened politely, nodding slightly, her focus still on the music and the feeling it had created, not on the praise itself. As she walked away from the piano, the applause followed her, echoing through the hall. She felt a sense of peace and satisfaction, knowing that she had shared her gift and let it shine. The plain woman who had been ridiculed had transformed the room, changing minds and hearts through the power of her music. She had demonstrated that talent, dedication, and courage could overcome prejudice, and that true artistry could leave an indelible mark on those who witnessed it. Her journey was not over, but in that moment, she had proven something vital, that the heart and soul behind the music mattered far more than outward appearances, and that her voice, once doubted, was now heard and celebrated by all. When the final note faded, the room remained silent for a heartbeat, as if everyone were suspended in disbelief and awe. Then, gradually, a single clap broke the stillness. Another followed, and soon the applause grew, filling the room with a wave of sound and appreciation. The plain woman rose slowly from the piano bench, her posture calm, almost unassuming, yet inside, she felt a surge of quiet triumph. She had faced ridicule, doubt, and dismissal, and she had turned it all into a performance that spoke louder than words ever could. The judges, who had watched skeptically at the beginning, now leaned back in their seats, pens forgotten, completely absorbed in the experience they had just witnessed. They whispered to one another, sharing brief, astonished glances, acknowledging the rare talent that had just graced their stage. Some of the audience members had tears in their eyes, unable to contain the emotions stirred by the music. The plain woman had transformed the atmosphere of the room, not through appearance or charm, but through the raw honesty and beauty of her playing. Her fellow contestants approached her cautiously, their earlier arrogance replaced with respect and admiration. A few admitted quietly that they had misjudged her. One even shook his head with a smile, saying, "I didn't expect that at all." Others offered small nods, acknowledging the depth and skill she had displayed. She accepted their gestures graciously, smiling softly, knowing that her music had already said everything she needed it to. There was no need for words. The performance itself had conveyed her journey, her struggles, and her triumphs. The applause continued, louder now, and the plain woman felt the weight of their recognition without letting it inflate her pride. She had never sought approval from others. Her passion for music had always been personal, a dialogue between herself and the piano. But now, as she took in the reactions of the room, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had not only played a piece of music but had shared a piece of her heart with every listener. And in return, they had listened, truly listened, and responded with an acknowledgement of the effort, dedication, and talent she carried quietly within herself. She stepped away from the piano and walked toward the judges, who now smiled, their expressions softened by admiration. They complimented her skill, her emotion, and her presence. She thanked them simply, feeling an inner peace that no amount of recognition could fully define. The experience had already given her something far greater: the affirmation that her perseverance and love for music could transcend appearances and prejudice. It was a validation of the countless hours she had spent practicing alone, the moments of doubt she had overcome, and the quiet resilience that had carried her through. As she made her way back toward the waiting area, the audience continued to applaud, some standing, some leaning forward with expressions of genuine admiration. She could feel the energy of the room, a mix of surprise, respect, and inspiration. People who had doubted her were now witnesses to her triumph. The young man who had mocked her earlier now stood clapping earnestly, his previous confidence replaced by humility and genuine appreciation. Others whispered among themselves, expressing astonishment at the extraordinary talent that had been hidden behind a plain appearance. The plain woman did not seek to dwell on their reactions. She knew that the music itself was the true measure of her success. Every note had carried her story. Every chord had spoken of her dedication and heart. She had transformed the ridicule she had encountered into a performance that touched lives, and that was more meaningful than any applause or praise. She allowed herself a small, contented smile, knowing that she had not only proven her own abilities, but had also challenged the assumptions of everyone who had judged her by her appearance alone. The judges continued their discussions, clearly impressed, while the audience slowly began to rise from their seats, many still clapping and expressing their admiration. Some approached her cautiously, wanting to express their personal reactions to her performance. She nodded and offered gentle smiles, graciously accepting their compliments. Each acknowledgement reinforced the truth she had known all along. Talent, dedication, and passion could never be hidden, no matter how unassuming the appearance of the person carrying them. Outside the audition hall, the plain woman walked into the cool air, feeling the weight of the day lift from her shoulders. The journey to this moment had not been easy. It had been filled with self-doubt, moments of insecurity, and the harsh judgment of others. Yet she had endured, practicing tirelessly, believing quietly in her own abilities. The experience had been a reminder that perseverance and commitment to one's passion could overcome even the harshest skepticism. She felt proud, not just for the recognition she had received, but for staying true to herself and her love for music. Her story would be remembered by those in the hall that day. They would recall the plain woman who had entered uncertain, faced mockery, and emerged as a commanding presence through the power of her performance. Her music had been a revelation, a demonstration that appearances were no measure of talent, and that genuine artistry could touch hearts and minds in ways nothing else could. She had shown that courage, patience, and dedication could turn doubt into triumph, and that even the quietest, most unassuming individuals could make a profound impact. In the days and weeks that followed, those who had witnessed her performance spoke of it with admiration. The judges remembered the depth of emotion and skill she had displayed, recounting the experience to colleagues and aspiring musicians. The contestants who had once dismissed her carried with them a lesson in humility and respect, realizing that talent was far deeper than the surface impressions they had relied upon. And the audience members carried the memory of her music, the way it had moved them, and the inspiration it had given. For the plain woman herself, the experience was transformative. She returned to her piano with renewed purpose, more confident in her abilities and more determined to pursue her passion. She had faced ridicule, she had faced doubt, and she had overcome both through the language she knew best: music. Her performance had not only changed the perceptions of those around her, but had also reaffirmed her own belief in herself. She knew that appearances could deceive, but dedication, talent, and the courage to share one's gift were undeniable. The plain woman's triumph was not only in the recognition she received, but in the knowledge that she had remained true to herself. She had turned a moment of potential, embarrassment into a powerful statement of artistry and resilience. The applause, the admiration, and the acknowledgement of the judges were all meaningful, but they were secondary to the fulfillment she felt in expressing her heart through her music. She had proven, in a way that could not be disputed, that her voice, quiet, unassuming, yet filled with depth, could resonate powerfully and leave an enduring mark on those who listened. As the day ended and she walked away from the hall, she carried with her a sense of accomplishment and inner peace. The plain woman who had once been ridiculed and underestimated had become a symbol of quiet strength and undeniable talent. Her journey was a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of believing in oneself, and the impact that true artistry could have on the world. She knew that the road ahead would bring more challenges, but she also knew that with dedication, passion, and courage, she could overcome them all. And in that moment, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her music had spoken louder than any doubt or mockery ever could.